So what I want to do is recreate this red glass crystal effect, a bit like this image, in Bryce, and I'm going to have to make use of hypertextures for this. So you probably, if you're not familiar with hypertextures, and in particular phased hypertextures, of which there is a PDF on Horror's website, which I will put a link in the description to, then you're going to find this rather hard to follow. It is going to be quite a tricky thing to do. So in Bryce, default state launch, I'm going to use from the library geometric this bookie sphere as my subject. I'm going to need to position my camera fairly close to this object because it's going to be sort of a macro scene, and I use a narrower field of view and depth of field effect. Since I know I'm going to use depth of field effect, I'm going to change the document setup so I'm rendering a smaller area, because depth of field effect is in the premium effects and therefore will be quite time consuming to render out. So I'm just going to go into render options here and select premium effects, lower the raise per pixel, select depth of field and set to current selection, and give that a render and see where I am with that. So you can see this bit at the front is a bit out of focus, and the outside edge here is the bit that's in focus. If I look at my reference image, I probably don't want that. I want the front edge to be more in focus. So I need to move the depth of field focus point, which I can do by creating a Bryce sphere, just a standard one, shrink it down, modify its attribute so it's hidden, switch to the side view, zoom in, position my sphere where I want the focus to be, go back to the camera view, go render options and set to current selection, and then I'll have been able to pull the focus more towards the surface where I want it. Since I'm using premium effects, I think I'm going to be using true ambience, might as well, and so I'm going to use true ambient scatter correction and boost light. I'm going to keep the maximum ray depth up at 6, I think. No, I'm going to drop it to 4, and use total internal reflection because I want a glass-like material, and that seems to help with the illusion of that. So having made these changes, and the boost light might also help with my highlights, which are a key feature of this, as I want these very intense highlights. So if I give this a render now, you can see that we've got the transience lighting giving us better shadow resolution, but for speed I'm going to disable the sunlight, and I'll set the atmosphere off and set it to fully black, so we now have just the material there which is glowing clearly. Let's have full ambient output for our effects, and then go into the material, modify the material, reset it to default grey perhaps, yes probably, give ourselves a transparent red colour like so, set the transparency, set the refraction up, I don't know, somewhere around here, get rid of the diffuse. In fact, I'll make that fully white at the moment. I've no specular effect, I'm just relying on the reflection generated through having transparency and this refraction value, which is grazing angle reflection, which is something else I want, because you'll notice there's not much reflected coming back to the camera, but the ground is reflected here. Let's go back to my scene, check out of there, give that a render, realise that we can see nothing now, and consider how I'm going to create the reflection effect. I'm going to use a phased hypertexture, so I'm creating a default Bryce sphere here, go into the material, and it's going to be on the ambient output. I'll put a blob in there, hold the shift key down, click on the name, go to my phased hypertexture that I've already made. There are plenty of videos on how to make these elsewhere. What I'm primarily concerned with in this video is setting things up so I can get my effects going. I want alpha scaling so I can control the level of output on the ambient channel here. I'll set it to 100 to start with, and that should give me a very bright sphere. Check out of here, edit and enlarge it so it encompasses the scene, and you can see we've got plenty of light output from this, probably a bit too much, and that's reflecting off that surface. So first port of call will be reducing the output of this, and let's try that at 15, see if that's more appropriate level. That's not too bad actually. So what we've got here, I've got these bright highlights. They're quite symmetrical compared with my reference image, and obviously because I'm on an infinite plane they can't really go below the level of the ground. So let's see if I get hold of my plane, I can edit and convert it to a cylinder, which will just be a flat disk in this case. So if I use the overhead view, you can see that it's a cylinder now, and then I can shrink that down until it's just outside the edge of my view, and that will allow the reflections to go a little bit further below the horizon. But I want to break these up. They're too uniform. So if I select my sphere that's creating that effect, go into the material, I can drive the ambient channel, hold the shift key down, go to basic, select check blue, and then if I take these blue areas and make them fully black, that will give me some patches of light and dark, which will break the pattern up a bit. But you can see it's made the ground very noisy, and this is because the light gathering is either gathering a very bright area or a dark area, and because it's a very diffuse effect, any one pixel could be gathering from light or dark. So in order to even that noise out, I'm going to create a standard light source and then modify it so that it is a gel light. So if I edit this light source, get rid of the diffuse and specular output, Transients optimize, use gel, include only well, background, just to avoid any confusion. I just like to make sure that it's only working as a gel output, and that just makes it safe even if I forget to modify those. Go into procedural, reset it. I don't need diffuse output, I give it ambient output. It's fully white on the ambient channel there. It's already been driven by the global ambient, and then what I will do is make sure that that's wrapped around my objects in the scene but is inside the sphere that's creating the effect. So that becomes now a gel light. So you can see now that the light's far more even but a bit dull. So I'll modify the material on this and give this a hypertexture output. Okay, I'll take it down, I don't know, 50. Make sure it's got alpha scaling so I can control the levels and give that render. Oh, that's way too bright. So I'll take this down to 5, check out and render again. Too low, try 15, render again. Bit on the bright side, let's try 10. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so I've now got an even light from my gel light, which is transparent to the direct light of the reflections but opaque to the light gathering process that we're using here with true ambience through these channels. So we're getting closer to where I wanted to get, but it's still not looking like my reference image, which is here. So let's consider modifying this a bit further. Well, I suppose my sphere, I can rotate around to change the distribution of the bright patches, like so. But we're getting reflections back here and here and here, and no reflections really around these out. This is either light or dark, which is a little bit extreme perhaps, because if we look at this, it does tend to be light around the outside edge. So to achieve that, I'm going to put another sphere inside this outer sphere. So I'll just copy and paste this outer sphere, reduce it in size, modify the material on this, get rid of my ambient pattern, just give it an ambient output there, and then make this, I think I will make this transparent. So this will be sort of white output that will not be as bright as the hypertexture driven checker pattern, but will just take the edge off the darkness around the edge of the object, hopefully. So if I introduce that now, you can see it's a bit light around the outside, but we are getting too much reflection towards the camera here. So if I go onto my object, go to the material, I'm going to try and suppress the reflection coming back to the camera using metallicity. Now if this was done like this using black output, it stops the light travelling through the object, which is a bit inconvenient. So I can hypertexture drive, oh, it's already dropped it in for me, thank you very much. Hypertexture drive the metallicity alpha channel here, and then modify this so if it was fully white it won't suppress it, but if I use lower the luminance level, I don't know, something like that, it will suppress it. So I just need to get the balance on the diffuse channel so that I'm suppressing most of the inner reflection and just getting the predominant edge reflection, and maybe about that level. So what's that? 248. Check out of there, give that a render. So it's darker in the middle, but we're still getting this around the outside edge, which is closer to my reference image there. That was my aim. So let's take Let's allow a bit more. Just need to raise this up a bit. There we go. You can see it's quite sensitive to these modifications, and then give that a render. It's a little bit too much there, so that was only a change of 3, wasn't it? So let's 249. Let's try that there and give that a render. I think that is about right. These look, I don't know, maybe a bit bright. I'm not sure. The ground could probably be doing with being lit a bit more. So if I go to my radial light and edit this procedural, let's take it up to 15 as it was before to provide a bit more light. That will light the ground, brighten things up a bit, and you can see we're getting some red transferring down there. So this doesn't look too bad. Let's try. Let's take this and copy and paste it. So we've got a few of these. I'll change my camera position then. Roll that round and back a bit. I don't know whether I want to widen my field of view or let's try that. Let's see, get those in the frame. See how they look then. Select my sphere here. Render options, set current selection for the depth of field. It's modified it slightly. So I've got a few of these to look at now. You can see ground could do with being brighter but less light. So if I take the cylinder, modify the material on here, make the ground white, then take the radial light, edit that, and in the procedural lower this back down again to 10. Let's give that a whirl and see how that looks. Okay, the grounds, I've hidden the transition between the ground and the background, which is something I was aiming for. Which is you know, there's very little background visible here, so now it's just a matter of getting the levels right. So I think this needs to be lowered a little bit more. That's too much, isn't it? Yep, this ground's gone dark. All these are quite sensitive to these modifications because the hypertexture is driving it over its normal levels. That doesn't look too bad. Now it's just a question of depth of field settings. That's nice and sharp. Those are, I don't know whether I want the depth of field to be that exaggerated for those in the background or whether that's going to, as an effect, work. Let's widen my field of view, lift my camera up, lower it down slightly, and render that. I'd like these to be slightly more in focus, so that's going to be in my render options, depth of field. I'll lower the lens radius. Let's see if that brings them in a little bit. Doesn't look too bad. I did want quite an exaggerated effect on these highlighted areas, so it's just a question of, let's have a look at the difference having total internal reflections making. Bear in mind we can modify these levels, so you can see we definitely need that because they just look too light inside and look plasticky rather than like glass. The other thing we can do is increase the maximum ray depth. That will slow render time down with the transients, and I don't know whether with TIR it's going to make much difference. There's that issue on the edge there which sometimes comes out when you combine depth of field with hypertextures or HDRI backdrops. So I think there's a bit of a problem there, but by the by, it doesn't look too bad. Just trying to decide whether the bright patches are a bit too extreme or not. Let's have a look at my crystal. It looks darker, so I'm going to select all my spheres here, go into the material. Maybe I'll take the transparency down. Let's just experiment with that to see how that looks. Probably a bit too much. Let's try 90. That doesn't look too bad actually. Okay, right, so it's gone on for a quarter of an hour, which was enough. It's quite a tricky topic as it is. So let's give this the full render and see how it turns out, and then I'll let you be the judge of whether or not I've succeeded. So hopefully that will help some people who are trying to get to the point where they're producing realistic looking glasses and gems with these highlights to get this kind of effect. And I'll only know when the render's completed. Okay then, cheers now.